Good afternoon. This is the Commissioners deliberation meeting in 24A-0296E, Public Service Company of Colorado's application for approval of its wildfire mitigation plan. Mr. Fetters, Mr. Davis, Mr. Gomez. Mr. Davis, can you tee it up for us?
Yes. I'm joined by fellow advisor Ian Fetters and Commission Counsel Paul Gomez, Wyatt Foreman, and Ruth Harper. And today, the Commission is going to take up Public Service's application for approval of its updated wildfire mitigation plan. And as you know, the parties in this case have reached a unanimous comprehensive settlement agreement and have jointly filed a motion to approve that agreement without modification and to grant the application as modified by that settlement. I'd like to briefly introduce the case, and before you take up the decisions to be made this afternoon, I'd like to present the principal elements of the settlement, and Mr. Fetters will conclude by our presentation with a summary of the closing statements of positions that were prompted by the Commissioner's questioning at the hearing on May 13th. So if that sounds okay, I'll move on.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. So Public Services filing contains three key components. It includes a 2025 to 2027 Wildfire Mitigation Plan, or what we'll call a WMP. It includes a Public Safety Power Shutoff Plan, or a PSPS plan, and it includes a series of accounting and cost recovery requests. The parties to this proceeding are Public Service, trial staff of the Commission, the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, City of Boulder, the Colorado Energy Consumers, which is a group of the company's largest non-residential customers, Climax Molybdenum Company, Comcast, Colorado Solar and Storage Association with the Coalition for Community Solar Access, City and County of Denver, Western Resource Advocates, and CTIA, the Wireless Association. On April 18th, Public Service filed an unopposed motion to approve the unanimous comprehensive settlement with a copy of the full agreement. Written testimony in support of the agreement was then filed by Public Service, trial staff, UCA, CTIA, WRA, and Boulder. During the proceeding, the Commission conducted a technical conference on January 27th, and that's where Public Service demonstrated its TechnoSilva software and other tools that are used for wildfire mitigation purposes. The Commission conducted public comment hearings in February, March, and April, and it also conducted a two-part Commissioners' Information meeting on February 20th and 21st, where the commissioners heard directly from other state agencies on their perspectives on the proposed WMP and PSPS plan. As I mentioned, the Commission conducted a formal hearing on May 13th, and after the hearing, closing statements of position were filed by CEC, Boulder, the solar parties, Climax, and finally Public Service, jointly with trial staff UCA, WRA, Denver, and CTIA. The 2025 to 2027 Wildfire Mitigation Plan includes four of what are called core categories of defenses. The first is situational awareness, that is, investments in tools and resources to support hazard identification, assessment, and response. Then there's system resiliency. These are the physical investments in distribution and transmission infrastructure intended to reduce the risk of a utility-caused wildfire. Example infrastructure proposals include targeted undergrounding and transmission line rebuilds, and it also includes vegetation management practices, such as right-of-way clearance or expanded vegetation-free zones around certain facilities. Then there's operational mitigation, which comprise adjustments in operations to reduce the risk of utility-caused wildfire. And a central piece of this is, of course, the PSPS plan. And then there's customer support or customer-related functions like information, education, and program offerings. Prior to initiating a PSPS or a power shutoff, there would be a sequence of events and decisions that the company would make to address potential events. And then if there is a shutoff, the PSPS plan addresses how power would be restored after an event. So prior to initiating a PSPS, the company will monitor real-time and historical data. And once a PSPS watch is identified or initiated, the company would monitor key weather indicators, including low fuel moisture, extreme wind speed, and low relative humidity. And when minimum criteria for those indicators are met, the company then would move to planning for an outage event, including which circuits are likely to be potentially impacted. After power is shut off, if it is shut off, the company would then move into restoration strategies. This involves inspecting the lines to identify and repair hazards. Public Service states that the length of an outage and the order in which customers are restored may vary. After restoration is complete, however, the company proposes to conduct after-action reviews, including with external stakeholders. The PSPS presents timelines for communication with various stakeholders, including offices of energy management, state and local officials, and potentially impacted customers. In terms of cost recovery, the updated framework in the application includes several components. Transmission capital costs would continue to be recovered through what is called the Transmission Cost Adjustment, or TCA. Public Service would defer capital and incremental operations and maintenance costs, and that deferral was proposed to have a full rate of return applied to the capital portion, and that would be for expenses after January 1st of this year. The deferred balance would include interest and depreciation expenses associated with the plant in service after January 1st of 2024. And there would be a Wildfire Mitigation Adjustment Rider, or a WMA, and that would recover these deferred costs and the projected revenue requirement on an ongoing basis with twice annual true-ups based on actual expenditures subject to an annual prudence review. Public Service requests approval to track and defer approximately $3.4 million in expenses associated with litigating this proceeding. And that reflects the vast scope of this case in terms of issues and dollars. For instance, Public Service identified over 400 discrete recommendations made through the intervening party's answer testimony. And turning to those dollars, Public Service estimates that the total price tag at the time the rebuttal testimony was filed would be about $1.6 billion of capital spending between 2025 and 2027, and increases in operation and maintenance spending during that same period of about $244 million. Now, the settlement addresses all of those factors. With respect to the Wildfire Mitigation Plan, it includes a proposal for Public Service to underground approximately 50 miles of the distribution system between 2025 and 2027. The settlement contains certain modifications and commitments regarding small conductor replacement, transmission line rebuilds, wildfire detection cameras, and vegetation management. These commitments include enhanced reporting, providing access to wildfire detection cameras to appropriate public safety partners and offices of energy management, and commitments on community outreach and engagement involving vegetation management. Public Service commits to offering battery energy storage system rebates to support eligible customers in certain risk zones with a budget of $2 million for each plan year. Participant eligibility for this would be limited to participants in the company's medical certification program and the Colorado Medical Exemption Program. Public Service will also develop a centralized database of transmission and distribution poles to track age, location, height, and repair and replacement information. And the settlement further contains commitments from the company regarding risk assessment and mapping. Specifically, there will be a stakeholder process for the parties to address the next iteration of the company's risk assessment and cost-benefit analysis of the company's wildfire mitigation efforts. There are also several provisions in the settlement that relate to the PSPS plan. For example, Public Service agrees to complete updates as identified in its bi-monthly status reports that have been filed in this proceeding. And the company makes numerous commitments regarding outreach and engagement, specifically with all incident leaders from the offices of energy management, not limited to counties, municipalities, and the State Division of Homeland Security and Energy Management field officers, emergency management field managers, sorry. Regarding the implementation of an event, the company agrees to integrate an incident command structure within the company to promote standardization of key internal roles and responsibilities. And the company also agrees to file what it calls a PSPS playbook. That would address internal business unit processes during an event, and that would be filed within 30 days of a final written decision issued by the Commission on the settlement and the proposed plans. Public Service also agrees to complete its identification of critical customers, including what are called critical facilities. And it would share a preliminary list of those customers and facilities with emergency management partners and local jurisdictions where the customers are located, which will then be developed with the local emergency management partners into a final mutually agreeable list of critical customers. And regarding communications, the company agrees to comply with the advanced notification processes and timelines included in the plan. The company will also make commercially reasonable efforts to, one, provide notice at 24 and 48-hour increments in advance of a potential PSPS event, and two, to engage in ongoing communications regarding anticipated restoration timelines after a proactive de-energization has been initiated. There's also a commitment along these lines that within 90 days following a final decision, unless further time requires, the company agrees to develop a framework to categorize those critical customers to enable the prioritization of customers and facilities to facilitate enhanced communication and engagement strategies, as well as that restoration work. And notably, the company, through all this, retains its rights to continue the evaluation of its minimum and threshold environmental criteria necessary to call an event. The settlement relies on the budget set forth in the company's rebuttal testimony, and as I just mentioned, that calls for a cumulative capital spend of about $1.6 billion and a cumulative O&M spend of an additional $244 million. However, key to the overall agreement is a framework for the potential securitization of certain capital costs that are associated with this plan. Public Service will file for a financing order seeking a securitized bond issuance by January 1st of 2029. Staff in the company agree to collaborate and mutually agree on the engagement of a commission securitization consultant and counsel, and that is all intended to promote the effectiveness in Title 40 of the state's public utilities law with respect to securitization. Prior to securitization, the settlement permits costs to be recovered as proposed by the company in its case, subject to the modifications made in the agreement. And the settling parties support expanded reporting during this time as contained in the Public Service rebuttal testimony. But in addition to that reporting framework, the company agrees to track and report customer outage impacts from events in its quality of service plan, or QSP. That would be done on an annual basis, reporting on a census block level. Public Service also agrees to develop a baseline probability model for circuits at risk for PSPS and wildfire safety operations to develop a forecast for anticipated risk reductions associated with mitigation investments, consistent with models used by other utilities. And beyond those specific terms that relate to the Wildfire Mitigation Plan and the PSPS plan, the settling parties also agree that the Commission should approve a new company accounting deferral in this proceeding to allow the company to track and defer actual costs associated with excess liability insurance premium, and that would be an amount over what is being collected currently in base rates. This new deferral would commence in October 2025 at the conclusion of the currently approved deferral, and it would be subject to limitations provided in the settlement agreement. This new accounting deferral would be capped at $50 million, and the company will not apply any interest to this new accounting deferral. And finally, the settling parties agree to support the commission establishing a rulemaking on wildfire mitigation planning and shutoff plans, starting with the opening of a miscellaneous proceeding after this case is over to consider and facilitate stakeholder discussions. The rulemaking takes a lot of time. The settlement also includes provisions that would apply to the next wildfire mitigation plan filing. So that was a lot of information for me to present. But before we turn it over to you, Mr. Fetters would wrap up our presentation with a review of the parties' closing statement of positions.
Mr. Fetters.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Ian Fetters with y'all's advisory staff. On May 28th, parties filed statements of positions, or SOPs, in the WMP. There were 5 total SOPs filed, 1 SOP by Boulder, 1 by CEC, 1 by the Solar Parties, 1 by Climax Molybdenum, and 1 joint SOP between PSCO, trial staff, the UCA, WRA, the City of Denver, and CTIA, whom I will refer to simply as the joint parties, and whose SOP I will refer to simply as the joint SOP. The SOPs represent that the settlement was negotiated by parties with a diverse set of interests in good faith, and all of the SOPs ultimately ask that the settlement be approved without modification. The SOPs emphasize that settlement was between broad groups of parties with diverse interests. The joint parties state that the parties in this case included representation of the company, the public interests, individual communities, small and large customer interests, environmental interests, industry groups, and the communication industry. They note that each party contributed to the resolution of the settlement and described the settlement as reflecting the collective wisdom of the diverse group of parties coming together to achieve a just and reasonable result. The joint parties also call the settlement an integrated whole and classify the various provisions of the settlement as interrelated and interdependent. Boulder calls it notable that a comprehensive settlement could be reached between a diverse group of parties on such a wide breadth of issues. Climax likewise describes the settlement as the product of extensive negotiations that led to compromises of varying and conflicting positions on myriad issues among all parties representing multiple diverse interests. The joint SOP states that by approving the settlement, the Commission would be approving the updated WMP, its mitigation activities, its scope, scale, and pace, and its cost recovery framework. The joint parties characterize the settlement as materially reducing wildfire risk, but also having additional benefits, including avoidance of higher financing costs, resiliency, reliability, and enhanced customer and community engagement. The joint SOP also focuses on 2 issues that received attention at the evidentiary hearing, those of securitization and recovering transmission costs through the Transmission Cost Adjustment, or TCA. Regarding securitization, the joint SOP emphasizes that the company will file a financing order application. The joint SOP says that the company is legally bound to do so, points out that it reaffirmed its commitment during the evidentiary hearing, and simply states, quote, if the settlement is approved as written, the company will file an application for a financing order as required. The joint SOP lists 3 impediments that existed to applying for a financing order at the time of PSCO filing rebuttal testimony, each of which it claims have been resolved at this time. First, there was some uncertainty around the definition of the term COEI costs within the Colorado Energy Impact Bond Act. The joint SOP states that the definition is expanded to include costs associated with wildfire mitigation plans in Senate Bill 25007, which at the time of the filing of the SOP was awaiting the governor's signature. It was since signed on May 29th. Second, the company expressed concern about existing and future financial challenges being an impediment to securitization. The joint SOP states that the set of conditions within the settlement, including recovery of actual WMP costs prior to securitization and the effective extension of the deferral of excess liability premiums, works to resolve this concern. Third, the Colorado Energy Impact Bond Act states that a financing order application is discretionary to the utility. The joint SOP states that the commitment to filing a financing order within the settlement resolves this concern. The joint SOP additionally states that prescribing a specific cost recovery in the event that securitization does not occur would be problematic here. Doing so from the joint parties' perspective would be an effort to bind future commissions with a predetermined decision, which it states cannot be done. The joint SOP also notes that the company cannot control whether a future commission would approve a financing order or if markets would procure the bonds. Regarding the TCA, the joint SOP emphasizes that the recovery of transmission capital through the TCA would be a continuation of existing practice and consistent with what was approved in the previous WMP. It notes that the recovery of transmission capital costs was not opposed by any party, that the transmission rebuild projects are designed to increase capacity, that the prudence of those capital costs would still be up for review, and that the detailed reporting regarding transmission line rebuilds required in the settlement means the parties would have more information for prudence review than they otherwise would. It finally notes that the securitization of transmission-related costs could require FERC approval, which would add uncertainty, complications, and delays to the securitization process. Boulder's SOP focuses predominantly on the benefits of wildfire mitigation plan as a whole, noting that wildfire mitigation protects communities from both the devastating effects of wildfires, but also the harmful impacts of customers of extended wildfire-related outages and PSPS events. Boulder describes the settlement as an appropriate compromise that would harden the transmission and distribution systems and support communities during outage, while also mitigating the financial burden on ratepayers. Regarding securitization, Boulder also emphasizes that the settlement agreement requires a financing order and notes that the securitization package will be developed with staff, which further supports a good outcome. Boulder emphasizes the importance of rapidly replacing aging infrastructure and asserts that the consequence of a catastrophic fire would be far greater than any savings from spreading out investments. It also notes that slowing the construction timeline could result in higher overall rate impacts for customers in the long term through increases in cost to construct and credit risk possibilities. All in all, the SOPs characterize the settlement as just, reasonable, and in the public interest, and ask that it be approved without modification. And now I'll turn it back to Mr. Davis.
So that concludes our presentation, and the major decision point for the three of you to discuss now is whether to grant the unopposed motion to approve the settlement agreement and thus approve the application as modified by that agreement.
So thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you, Mr. Fetters. Thanks to the parties and the company. And I'll just go first and say, as outlined in the parties' SOPs and the advisor presentation, there's a lot to like in this settlement agreement, including better processes and approaches for wildfire system operations and PSPSs, greater situational awareness, support for customers dependent on medical equipment, improved reporting, accountability, and transparency, the laying of a foundation for better approaches to ongoing work prioritization through a stakeholder process to improve cost-benefit analysis and risk mapping, and many others described by Mr. Davis. The company also agrees to develop a 10-year vision and to establish a model for quantifying the estimated wildfire risk reduction associated with the mitigation efforts. For me, that all represents significant progress. Perhaps most importantly, I believe that the company's willingness to pursue securitization is the decisive consideration in making acceptable the long-term rate impacts of the greatly elevated wildfire mitigation plan capital spending. So given all this in the unanimous settlement agreement, I'm prepared to vote to approve the settlement agreement as is. At the same time, however, I have some significant concerns and comments, particularly around overall capital spending and the company's future plans that they laid out in support of this spending that I'd like to request that we include in our order. So I'd like to hear from you guys, vote on the settlement agreement, and then I have like 3 or 4 issues I'd like to see if you have any thoughts on, and if would be interested in including them in the order. So I'm prepared to vote to approve the settlement agreement as is, but have some further comments. Commissioner Goman, where are you at? Anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, thanks. I would also vote to approve the settlement agreement as presented. As you pointed out, it's and Mr. Davis, Mr. Fetters. This is a large plan, significant advancement of all of the efforts from the previous wildfire mitigation plan, and also a dramatic escalation in the spending to do so. So certainly, I think we see from the other parties that support for the settlement was largely built around the idea of securitizing these costs and really minimizing the ratepayer impact as we move forward. And I think there was a lot of discussion at the hearing, around that and around, really ensuring that the company makes a sincere effort to make that happen, given, the significant customer savings that come from financing this effort in such a way, and kind of how that was able to build support around such a major plan and such a major expenditure. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up, and I don't know, if we put this in there, certainly not a modification, but something we had talked about at hearing too. As we look at deploying additional resources and support, especially in PSPS areas, to support customers with batteries, whether they be residential, commercial. I think it's really crucial to find the financial and operational efficiencies across programs and across purposes with these different deployments. So, a battery installed at the home of an individual or in a commercial building for that, hopefully one or not even one day a year, has a use and has a value the other 364 days of the year in the blue sky situations to help to reduce greenhouse gases, to help lessen other expenditures on the distribution, transmission, generation side of the business. And that's really how we can ensure that not only are we delivering a grid that is kind of strategic and intended to serve the future purposes in the best and safest way possible, but also finding every operational and financial efficiency that we can for customers, so that all customers are able to benefit from what assets like that can bring to the system. And so, I'd love to at least even just mention it here in our approval. I think this is something we're going to have to keep ourselves focused on as we look across all of the different proceedings that begin to deploy and change different resources on the system. We need to ensure that we're finding all of these efficiencies possible to really get the full value out of anything deployed on the system. We're seeing just immense potential pressure on rates coming. And so it's important that we strategize all of these investments to ensure that anywhere we can find those efficiencies, we do, such that they really lower the overall system costs in the future by using them cross-purpose when that's possible and when that's feasible. So happy to hear your other thoughts, but happy to approve the settlement agreement, and certainly wanted to appreciate all the work that went into that from all the parties. This was a massive and diverse set of stakeholders who were able to come together on a really incredibly far-reaching and expensive and impactful plan. And that is no easy task. So I appreciate all of the work that went into, the compromises and getting us to where we are with a unanimous settlement here.
Appreciate that, and just would say maybe if you want to provide some language to advisors and council, maybe we could put that in a TBC order about making sure that the storage investments were part of an integrated plan to defer future capital. Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Thanks. And I would also just start out saying I would also approve the the settlement and thank the parties for coming together. I think that the company, really put together a pretty comprehensive plan here. And with the initial comments, I think there was general support right off the bat from all the parties. Really issues around process, around cost recovery, and some of those sorts of things. And I felt like the company really tried to accommodate those concerns and responded to those concerns really well. So I appreciate everybody coming together in this um, very comprehensive settlement. I would also agree with Commissioner Gilman's comments about how these emergency resources are also just resources, and we have a number of programs that we have in play, and that the company is developing and enrolling people in those programs, and maybe even utilizing an aggregator network to accelerate the deployment of these things. And other things I think are are good ideas to make sure that these are not just emergency assets, but are assets all the time, and also can, provide a benefit to the customers, financially, in the times when they're not relying on them for resilience and reliability. The only other additional comment that I would have is, to encourage the company to work with the insurance commissioner, to work with the state and with the insurance companies in the state to make sure that this large investment that they're making and the mitigation of risk that it provides is being recognized within the insurance community. I think that it's true that this is a large investment, and that large investments end up costing money for the ratepayers. But affordability includes more than your electric rates. And I know that insurance rates, particularly in the mountains, have been going up, 25, 30, 40, 50% every year. And, it's really making things quite unaffordable for people in those zones. And so if this investment through the utility system can help to lower those costs, the net impact could be positive for homeowners and for businesses that are seeing incredible pressures on their insurance rates. So that's the only other thing I would add. But back to you, Mr. Chairman, and I know you had some other
Yeah.
things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so Commissioner Plan, if you'd be willing to provide some language to advisors and council for inclusion in a TBC order, that'd be great.
Yep.
And Commissioner Gilman, are you all right with the language suggested by Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the objective here is to reduce risk, and there should be a commensurate benefit to that, not only of like reducing the actual risk of people's houses and towns being at risk of wildfire, but also in financial recognition of the lower risk, which comes through the form of insurance. And I would say, I mean, perhaps even the company's insurance. No, you're not focused only on the company's insurance. But that's also an issue we've seen where, you would hope that a massive multi-billion-dollar plan to reduce risk is recognized in doing so. And so, yeah, happy to review that language when it comes out. And, as I understand both of these, just not any sort of modifications, but things to keep our eye on, that we think these are important follow-ups to ensure that we're doing the best we can with the expenditures that are being made.
Yeah, so Commissioner Plant, are you, I mean, I totally support lowering utility insurance costs as well. Are you okay with that friendly amendment from
Yes.
Commissioner Gilman? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I have 3 or 4 issues I'd like to include in the order. The first one's on capital spending. In its filing, the company sort of lays out a vision for the future and its long-term rate forecast and analysis. I think it's hearing Exhibit 120 attachment SPP4 that I just find really troubling. More specifically, the company is telling us that they intend to grow rate base by a staggering 19% per year over the next 5 years. The company justifies this overall rate-based growth or supports it by asserting that sales will grow by 8% per year over the next 5 to 10 years, which is roughly 40 times faster than the experience over the last 15 years. While that sales growth forecast is not being litigated in this case, that's literally before us next week. This record is clear that the risk of sales and revenue not growing by this much is pretty much entirely on customers. And at historical levels of sales and revenue growth, I would find that the resulting doubling or tripling of rates from today's rates that would occur at these capital spending levels, at least without securitization, would likely not be in the public interest. Given this reality and in the absence of securitization, I would like our order to say that we likely could not support the level of capital spending that is being proposed here. The maintenance and replacement of key infrastructure has been deferred for decades. And given this reality, I struggle with trying to catch up in 3 years at these levels, and would like to say, a slower capital growth would have been appropriate, again, without securitization. I'd also like to say in our order that without future revenue growth along the lines that the company is projecting of, whatever, 8%, that this multi-billion-dollar level of capital spending should be viewed as a one-time surge and not a permanent feature of utility capital spending based on this record. For me, the current revenue base of this utility is too small and future revenue growth is too speculative to support this level of spending as being in the public interest without securitization. If the sales and revenue growth does show up over time, then we can certainly increase capital spending back to these levels. So again, for me, the company's apparent willingness to securitize is the only reason or the main reason I can support this settlement agreement. So I know I'm hitting you with this for the first time, Commissioner Gilman, but any thoughts on flagging this issue? I know we've been talking about it for weeks and months, but this is the first litigated proceeding where we're approving a multi-billion-dollar capital spending with evidence from the company showing, 20% year-over-year increases in rate base. So comments, thoughts, you okay putting something like this in our order?
Yeah, I think that's generally agreeable. There's two things. There's kind of like the dramatic escalation right now in spending that we're seeing and how much that relies upon the load growth actually showing up to result in, palatable rates, I think, for customers. Having a little bit of flashbacks to the PSIA and those other things, right, which are intended to be a short-term fix to get the system up to speed, make things safer, and then kind of just end up being actually expected for a very long time at the same or actually escalating levels of spending. So
maybe they can quote our order for the next 10 years talking about how it's a 3-year thing, but I think we might as well try and do our best to set the framework. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the way you framed it works. And I think what we don't want to do is inject a lot of uncertainty here with this plan, right? They won't be applying to securitize it until after, right? So we're not saying that this plan somehow is contingent upon that, but I think what you're more saying is that this level of spending was acceptable in terms of its customer rate impact, in very large part because of the expectation that it will be securitized, which will minimize the ratepayer impact in this instance, and that this should very much be viewed differently if there's a different proposal in the future, for future plans that would not take such mitigating kind of efforts for ratepayer impact. I just want to make sure to carve out, like, it's kind of a future plan versus this plan thing, recognizing that the securitization comes after. And, we don't want to inject that sort of uncertainty right now in this plan. But more, as we look at future approvals, at future plans, this is a massive uptick in spending, a many-fold increase from what we saw in the previous WMP. And it largely works this time in this circumstance because of the funding mechanism. And if conditions were to change for future plans, this level of spending could and should be viewed very differently, I think. Does that jive with what you're saying?
Yeah.
Making sure we're saying the same thing.
Yeah. And we'll do a TPC order and agree on the language.
Yeah.
Commissioner Plant, comments?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think securitization was a really important part of this overall plan for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's saving, I think, the hundreds of millions of dollars to the ratepayers. And had we had hundreds of millions of dollars of more cost to the ratepayers, it would have been maybe a different outcome. And so I think that it is an absolutely critical component of this. And it's also, it's unlike a number of other resources that we invest in the system. It's hardening of, the resources that they have. It's reducing their risk, and those have other benefits to the company, beyond, a rate of recovery. And I mean, they were recently downgraded because of wildfire liability risk. As Commissioner Gilman mentioned, the insurance rates that they're paying are going up. So these have other benefits to the company and to the ratepayers, beyond just the investment of the, in the resources. And so yeah, I would have also had a lot more difficult time approving this level of spend had we not been able to include securitization in the plan. So it was very critical to me.
All right. Thank you both. The second thing I have is sort of on the nature of the spending. At hearing, Mr. Berman testified about Mr. Berman and I talked about the Colorado Power Pathway transmission investment and how it expanded transmission capacity and was part of a broader vision to retire coal plants to produce transparent fuel, O&M, and other savings. As such, $1 billion invested in the Colorado Power Pathway could produce quantifiable annual savings of whatever, 70 million, 100 million more. That made it an attractive long-term steel for fuel investment. Although I don't doubt the societal benefits of these wildfire mitigation plan investments, including the sort of externalities you talked about, Commissioner Plant. As Mr. Berman acknowledged at hearing, these wildfire mitigation investments are fundamentally and qualitatively different than this Colorado Power Pathway benefits. Instead of steel for something, these dollars are more just steel with no direct long-term offsetting ratepayer revenue or cost savings produced. And for me, this has two implications, both of which I'd like to highlight in our order if you're amenable. First, again, in the absence of securitization, I struggle with providing this spending with a long-term WACC return, given that there is no offsetting ratepayer return. As such, and we've already talked about this, the settlement agreement approach of long-term securitization seems fundamentally right to me. And again, the primary reason why I'm willing to support the settlement agreement. So maybe it's just another argument about why the securitization was so important. But second, in the absence of securitization and consistent with Mr. Pereira's requested hearing for more guidance, I would find in this case, on this record, that the TCA should be limited solely to investments that expand transmission capacity. As such, going forward, the TCA should not include wildfire mitigation spending, although given the company's commitment, willingness to securitize, as I said, and as part of the approval of the settlement agreement, I'd allow it, but I'd limit the sort of future use of the TCA going forward. The statement of positions talked about how that's existing practice. On this record, I change existing practice, again, only in the absence of the securitization and only in the absence of the settlement agreement. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Commissioner Gilman.
So you're talking about in kind of a hypothetical future scenario, if there was no securitization, no settlement agreement, I guess in my words, you would discourage the use of the TCA as a mechanism to recover wildfire expenditures.
More than that, it would require a future order from a future commission to do it. So the existing practice would be stopped. So if the company failed to securitize for whatever reason, wildfire mitigation costs would no longer appear in the TCA.
Even wildfire costs from this?
No, anything that's part of the settlement agreement, that would still be in the TCA.
Okay. The future.
Yeah, future
potential. That'd be
just setting what would happen if there was no securitization, or what happens as part of the next negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, might need an assist from from the attorneys on this one to understand to what extent that's like limiting future commissions and what they can do. That's why I was kind of phrasing it as discouraging. I'm saying is not our preference, or we don't see general benefit in that without kind of the context of this deal. So that probably just needs to be figured out in terms of what can we actually see in limiting it. Yeah, I mean, this is something the commission's already looked at and I think was pretty clear on in terms of limiting what expenses are going into the TCA and really trying to be more disciplined and lock down on those actually serving new load and expansion. So I think that is all still true. So I don't disagree with your general sentiments there. I think probably what we need from advisors or attorneys is what should that language really look like in terms of, is this, a strong discouragement of this without, if we lose the good financial bells and whistles, kind of discouraging use of the TCA, or is there some sort of more rigorous kind of bounds we can put on it here?
I was willing to let these costs in the TCA when they were much, much smaller, but at these levels, I just don't think it's appropriate to find that on this record. But again, I'll suggest some language and we'll work it through with counsel in the TBC process.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the intent in terms of as they're crafting future WMPs, what they should be shooting at.
And if they fail to securitize in this one, then once the failure is clear, it's not in the TCA anymore.
Okay, so you are talking about WMP costs from 2025 to 2027 if they fail to securitize.
No, not backwards looking. Not backwards looking. So, I'm sorry. So if the securitization fails, anything after the failed securitization would not be in the TCA.
Understood. Okay, that's where my
sorry
coming on what we're doing with things already spent.
Not messing with that. That's being spent with understanding the settlement agreements being approved.
Yeah, I mean, I don't generally disagree in spirit. I think the TCA is kind of special treatment here that we made fairly clear we see more restrictive bounds on more generally, but was part of this deal with securitization being a very large part of this deal, but would not reach back on
Yeah.
things already spent. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I got it. I don't disagree with you in spirit, but might need an assist from the attorneys on exactly how stridently that is expressed.
Yeah, from discourage to forbid.
Correct.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I appreciate the clarification because I was misunderstanding a little bit as well. So, I mean, I guess to Commissioner Gilman's point about future WMPs, obviously, our future commissions determinations, but I guess what I would say is, a lot of times. The things that we do are seen as setting a practice, or this is what the commission decided to do, and so we should just continue that. And you know I guess just sort of underscore, I think, what you're saying, which is this is kind of a package, and this approval wouldn't be there if not for this other piece. And so, in future wildfire mitigation plans, don't look at these individual components of this decision and say, oh, well, that's what the commission's done in the past. And it's really a kind of a package deal.
Yeah, and I think, yeah. All right, two more things. One on the timing of the finance order filing. As Mr. Fetters discussed, and at page 10 to 12 of its SOP, the company lists 3 uncertainties that have been resolved since the case filing. Given this, and consistent with Mr. Berman's oral testimony at hearing, I'd like to suggest putting language on our order saying the commission interprets section 50 and 57 of the settlement agreement as creating an expectation that the financing order will be filed with the commission no later than January 1st, 2028. At hearing, Mr. Berman seemed fine with a firm deadline, but expressed a concern that there may not be a final prudency determination about the wildfire mitigation costs incurred by the end of 2027. While that may be true, the company routinely files rate cases where the last few months of the hearing historical test year are updated with actual spending while the case is being litigated. I think Commissioner Plant, you expressed some frustration about the November filing, and then time runs over Thanksgiving and the holidays, and then they update the test year. So I think we can set our expectation that a finance order will be filed no later than January 1st, 2028 by interpreting the settlement agreement and not modifying it with some language saying the commission can review the prudency of dollars spent at the end of 2027 while reviewing the financing order. So I just really struggle with that commercially reasonable language, and would like to create an expectation of a drop dead date without modifying the settlement agreement. So I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, thoughts on that?
I think that's reasonable.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
All right, thanks. Last one. Finally, I remain concerned about the misaligned financial incentives where both the company's short-term and long-term earnings are materially reduced by securitization, and the impact it might have on the company's willingness to securitize. And I'd just like to outline this concern in our final order. At the same time, given that this was a unanimous settlement agreement, and given the arguments put forward at hearing and in the settlement agreement by the parties, I'm prepared to defer to the settling parties on this as they're closer to I am. So again, support the settlement agreement, but would like to put some language in the order flagging the concern. So Commissioner Gilman, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I think it gets to, do they have all of the intent and motivation to make that financing order successful. I will point out, I mean, it's probably not as entirely one-sided as that would appear. I mean, the company and their shareholders have significant wildfire liability on the line here as well. And so this is probably one of the areas where spending in this area does directly benefit them by reducing the company and shareholder liability. Or I guess potential for liability of like a big event or whatever. So to the extent like, you know, hypothesizing, but like if they could do far less because it was more contentious, if it was more expensive, if they didn't securitize, it does kind of seem like that may be in their best interest because it makes the package bigger. It makes what they can do bigger. If you buy that there's a finite amount that they could spend or they could impact bills by. I think that is a situation we're bumping up against in many areas on like what is going to be the limit of customer bill impacts in all of the things being proposed. There's a pretty overwhelming amount of things being proposed that we're expecting ratepayers to pay for. But at the end of the day, these are ratepayer funded activities that do help to reduce shareholder liability of a potentially catastrophic event. And so I would give them the credit that I think there is some motivation there to maximize the impact of the money spent. That's my sincere hope as like a counterweight that like I understand, yes, it would be nice maybe for them to profit off all this, but isn't it nice also to have ratepayers help fund in a palatable way, reducing this risk for them. So that's why I really hope this is an area where maybe there is a little more aligned incentive than just like at first blush.
I mean, it's a leap of faith. We're voting for this thing.
I know.
I mean, they're still claiming massive rate base growth, both to us and the financial community. So,
I'm hoping there is real incentive there, especially given, you know, if everyone gets, I was going to use the wrong analogy there. If this does not turn out in a way that everyone expects, you know, that could significantly impact the opinion of the parties, the opinion of the commission in the future on these sorts of expenditures and the size and breadth of them. So I would like to hope that they have motivation to make this turn out in a way that kind of everyone hopes and expects.
I agree with all that. And you got $500 million in net present value long-term earnings. So I just want to clarify the trade-off if it sounds like you're willing. Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I support that. You know, I think, you know, talking about the wildfire liability, I mean, I think it's important to also, you know, look at in absence of the wildfire mitigation plan, you know, that kind of risk, you know, not only creates a liability for the company, but when they get downgraded, you know, it can really create costs for the ratepayers as well and increase overall costs of borrowing. And so, you know, I think we can, you know, point to this plan, yes, as a significant investment, but also as a sort of a hedge for, you know, lower cost borrowing and you know, maintaining or maybe even improving of the credit rating of the company. So.
All right. That's all I had. Commissioner Gilman, anything else?
Ms. Harper's here.
Ms. Harper.
The good old attorneys. Here, Blake, I just wanted to take it back to the discussion earlier about the recovery of wildfire mitigation costs and the TCA. Just to clarify, just to be clear, were you talking about the commission here making a decision about recovery of future wildfire costs under the TCA?
There's an existing advice letter that allows the company to put costs in the TCA, right? We modified the TCA maybe a year or two ago. And I guess I'm asking for a finding in this order that absent this settlement agreement and absent securitization, that language is no longer operative. So if beyond the investments in the settlement agreement. So it's shifting the inertia. So they spend the money over the next 3 years. They don't securitize. Starting in 2029, the TCA would no longer be a mechanism for recovery of wildfire mitigation expenses. Does that make sense, Ms. Harper?
It does, and I may have to phone a friend here, Mr. Davis, just for clarification about that would be a modification to the TCA, so that might have to come in a TCA
in the next rate case. So yeah, I'm not, and maybe and we can do this in the TBC process or bring it back at another CWM.
That's sort of what I was anticipating, is perhaps talk about this more with advisors and council, and then if it has to come back for something more specific, since there might be some considerations there about what exactly is being decided.
In this case.
In this case, yeah.
Yeah, and it may be guidance for the next rate case filing. So, but I am suggesting a change to the existing TCA, based on this, but I am now over my skis in response to Commissioner Gilman's question. So I think I just try and take it up as part of the TBC process.
Okay, that works. And we can certainly have follow-up discussions to bring it back if the decision point needs to be modified.
Okay. Mr. Davis, Mr. Fetters, does this give you what you need? Probably more than you need or needed wanted, but putting that aside, do you have everything you need?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Goen, anything else?
No, nothing additional. Just thanks again to our staff, our advisory and legal counsel, as well as all the parties for getting us to a really broad agreement here. I did not exactly know that was going to be possible when I first saw the breadth and the size of this plan. So I appreciate the efforts for sure.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, same. Thanks to all the parties and the staff that worked on this, and also special thanks to Mr. Davis, who picked up the reins as they were dropped on him. So appreciate everybody's hard work.
Who's the horse here, Commissioner Plant?
I'm not going to.
Just the case. I don't know. Likewise, thanks to everybody. I'm struggling with the dollars, but with that, we're adjourned. See you guys in a couple hours. No rest for the weary. Take care.